Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leek. I'm John as always, and it's that time again. It's set review time. Perhaps with the release of Throne of Eldraine, we'll finally get a couple of months without a set coming out, but we have 269 cards to look at. We're going to start today with the white cards. First off, a couple of quick disclaimers. Remember, this is a limited set review. I'm not talking about standard, commander, brawl, tiny leaders, whatever. I'm talking about limited. I'm talking about draft. I'm talking about sealed. I might say that a card is bad, but I mean it's bad in sealed or draft. Don't at me. Or at me, whatever. Secondly, I've not played with basically any of these cards. There's a couple of reprints in here. So these are sort of the ways that I am first going to approach these cards at pre-release and the first week and the second week until I get more experience with them. So the ratings here are how I'm going to start approaching these cards, but they can change over time. Also remember, these are just my opinions. Your opinions on cards might be different, and that's what set reviews are for. I strongly recommend not taking set reviews as gospel and saying X Pro said this, therefore this card must be this good. Think about things, talk about things. Use that comment section down below to talk with me and talk with each other about these cards. But without further ado, let's get started with Acclaimed Contender. Acclaimed Contender is 2 and a white for a creature human knight. At rare, it's a 3/3. When Acclaimed Contender enters the battlefield, if you control another knight, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a knight, aura, equipment, or legendary artifact card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, welcome to Eldraine. Knights are a big deal, specifically in the Mardu colors, black, red, and white. There are a whole lot of knights in there, and a couple of those colors have a good deal of equipment. Black, red primarily, but white has an amount as well. There are auras because enchantments are the blue-white focus, as well as artifacts. Legendary artifacts, well, there's a few of those, and they're pretty rare, so you're probably not going to have those. But this is a 3/3 for 3. That's already super playable. I'm pretty happy to have a Centaur Courser in my deck, and this is a Centaur Courser that in its colors, unless you happen to be white-green, I guess, maybe, you're probably very likely to hit one of these cards, which means that it is a 3/3 for 3 that draws a card. That's pretty darn good. This isn't a bomb, and you're actually probably going to be a little bit sad to see this as the rare in your pack, but it's still a very high pick. I've got this at a B-. If the pack's bad, this is definitely going to be the first pick, and it should be a relatively high-ish pick otherwise. Even if you're not in Knights, it's still a totally playable card. B- for Acclaimed Contender. All That Glitters is up next. All That Glitters is 1 and a white for an enchantment aura at uncommon. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment you control. So it's a build around aura, obviously, but luckily the blue-white archetype is enchantments and artifacts. There are a lot of cards that pay you off for playing a bunch of enchantments and artifacts. So this card in that specific deck could actually be pretty decent. But you must be in that deck, so be aware of that. This isn't a card that I pick to jump into the deck either, because the payoff isn't necessarily that big. This is still an aura. You're still going to get bounced, you're still going to have the creature die, and you're going to get 2 for 1. But if I'm in blue-white, if I already have a number of artifacts and enchantments, good ones, by the way, don't play bad ones to make this card better. You're going to end up with a deck that is mostly bad unless you draw this card. And as a reminder for anybody who perhaps happens to be new, you don't draw a lot of the cards out of your deck in the average game of Draft or Sealed. You might just not draw this one. Still, if you're in that deck, I think this is probably around a C+ or so. There are just better payoffs than this, but this is one that you can include. If you are not in blue-white, you probably should just never, ever, ever play this card. So keep that in mind. It's kind of like a D-, I guess, up to like a C+, depending on the deck. Which, of course, is a reminder about grades, and grades in my set reviews. They're just sort of an end cap on the discussion. The discussion is really the big part of this. So don't get too hung up if I give something a minus and you think it should not be a minus. That's not really a big part of this set review. The point is to discuss the cards. Up next is Archon of Absolution. Archon of Absolution is 3 and a white for a creature Archon at uncommon. It's a 3/2 flyer with protection from white. Protection is back. Remember, protection means that this creature can't be blocked, targeted, dealt damage, enchanted, or equipped by anything that is white. It also says that creatures can't attack you or a planeswalker you control unless their controller pays 1 generic mana for each of those creatures. 1 mana per creature isn't a ton. If your opponent isn't a go wide deck, they'll pay the 1 mana to get their bomb to attack you, but it can still be a bit of a pain. And if you are against a go wide deck, if their plan is to attack you with 7 things a turn, it's going to be a little bit rough for them. Luckily, this is also a 3/2 flyer for 4, which is totally serviceable. Pro white will catch some people because this is actually having protection from its own color, so you may have combat tricks or auras that you want to cast on this that are white, and remember, you can't. It's a symmetrical effect. Nobody can hit this with anything that is white. But all in all, I think this is a solid B-. I think it's a decently high pick, and against those go wide strategies, it'll feel even better. So B- for Archon of Absolution. Totally serviceable card with a cool little bonus, and the protection from white generally should be a bonus. It's going to be pretty rare that it's actually a downside for you. Ardenvale Paladin is up next. Ardenvale Paladin is 3 and a white for a creature human knight at common. She's a 2/5 with Adamant. This is a not a mechanic, but a keyword reminder, I think they're called. If at least 3 white mana was spent to cast this spell, Ardenvale Paladin enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. And that's what Adamant means. If at least 3 X mana was spent on this spell, something bonus happens. So if you pay 1 white for this spell, it's not a 2/5, it's a 3/6. Meh? I mean, a 2/5 for 5 I'm unimpressed with, but I do remember Dutiful Servants, and I remember Wisconsin Crab, and they were okay for the same mana cost and same stats. If it can be a 3/6, then, I mean, that's gravy. It's still a very awkward creature that mostly blocks and I guess attacks and doesn't die necessarily, but it's very filler. It's a knight, which will be a bonus in certain decks if you're in the Mardu colors, and this is probably still just a solid C, but I don't think I'm going to go up to a C+ on this. I think there's just way too many better cards than this. You shouldn't be going out of your way to pick this, and if you have better cards, you just shouldn't play it. So a C for Ardenvale Paladin. Ardenvale Tactician is up next. Ardenvale Tactician is 1 white for a creature human knight at common. It's a 2/3 flyer, but it can go on an adventure. This is one of the big mechanics of this set. You can see there's this little storybook thing going on. There's a whole other spell on this card, and it's called Dizzying Swoop, which is 1 and a white for an instant adventure. Tap up to 2 target creatures. So what happens if you have this card in your hand? You can cast the creature, in which case you get a 2/3 flyer, or you can cast the adventure, so you can pay 1 and a white, instant speed, tap 2 creatures. Then you exile this card, it has gone on an adventure, and you can later in the game cast the creature as though it was in your hand. You can't cast the creature if it's exiled in any other way, only if it specifically went on an adventure. And once you've cast the creature, once the creatures come back from the adventure, whatever, the adventure spell is gone. It's no longer something that you should really care about, unless you bounce it back to your hand, I suppose. These cards, I think, are going to be way more powerful than any of them read, and most of them read pretty darn well. The fact that it's 2 cards on 1, and that you do get both sides of it if you want. You know, this isn't a split card where you have to pick one or the other. If you have time, if you have the mana, and if you do the adventure first, you get to do both of these, which is very powerful. But for this card specifically, Ardenvale Tactician, we're looking at an adventure spell that's not super impactful. Tapping up to 2 target creatures is not an effect I ever terribly care about. I did care about it once in Innistrad, where there was a flashback version. So the typical game plan of that was actually tap 4 creatures, because you would cast it and then immediately flash it back. In this case, it's a little less impactful because you don't get to flash back the spell, but you do get a creature. However, I'm not quite seeing the got them, the really good game plan here, because if you do cast Dizzying Swoop at the end of their turn, then you get to cast Ardenvale Tactician on your turn, but it has Summoning Sickness, so it's not like you really got much. You prevented your opponent from attacking, maybe. So I'm not massively impressed by this card. I don't think it's a huge pick or anything, but I think it is just a fine include. A 2/3 flyer for 3 is always a solid card, and the few times where Dizzying Swoop is going to be the correct card that you play, well, it'll be a big bonus here. So I think it's a C+. It's not super impressive, but I think it's just fine, and I think all the adventure cards are, I think. Up next is Bartered Cow. Bartered Cow is 3 and a white for a creature Ox at common. It's a 3/3. When Bartered Cow dies or when you discard it, create a food token. This is another new mechanic in Throne of Eldraine. Food is an artifact token that says pay 2, tap it, and sacrifice it to gain 3 life. And as we'll see in later set reviews, there's actually other things that you can do with food. But as is, this is a 3/3 for 4, a Hill Giant. That makes a token that at some point in the game you can pay 2 and gain 3 life off of. The food deck that we'll talk about later is actually in black-green, so Bartered Cow doesn't really help out there. But remember that food is an artifact, and so if you are in blue-white, where artifacts do matter along with enchantments, well, this might actually be a little bit better there. As is, though, I think it's just filler in the vast majority of decks, so I think it's just kind of a C. I think if you desperately need a creature, you'll play this, and there is that little bit of a bonus to it. If you really want artifacts, well, this maybe pushes up to maybe a C+, but I still don't even think it gets there even in that deck. But I don't think it goes any lower than a C. It's an okay creature that you can play, but if you can, play better cards. Up next is Beloved Princess. Beloved Princess is a single white mana for a creature human noble at common. She's a 1/1 with lifelink. Beloved Princess can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. Hi, I'm the Mana Leek. I don't like 1/1s for 1 unless they're insane, and this princess is not insane. A 1/1 lifelinker that doesn't fly just isn't any good. Not being able to be blocked by big creatures doesn't do much for me. In the early game, where you ideally want to draw and play your 1-drop, she gets blocked by everything. In the late game, she may still just get blocked, because in the late game, hopefully your opponent doesn't just have 4/4s or greater, because you're still probably in a lot of trouble, and she doesn't get you out of there. Yeah, I don't really see why I would ever play a Beloved Princess. I think it's a very bad card. This is a creature that I just really don't want to play. So I've actually got her an F. There are way better cards that you can play. Yes, she's a creature. No, every creature is not playable. F for Beloved Princess. Up next is Charming Prince. Charming Prince is 1 and a white for a creature human noble at rare. He's a 2/2. When Charming Prince enters the battlefield, choose 1. Scry 2. You gain 3 life, or exile another target creature you own, return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. I'm kind of sad here because this card is good. This card is very, very good in limited. But boy, is it a bad rare. This is not a rare that you want to open and see. It's not really first pickable. It is just a 2/2 for 2. And a 2/2 for 2 that scries 2 is good. Like, don't get me wrong, it's good, but it's not a bomb, it's just a bit of value. A 2/2 that gives you 3 life, well, it's fine. It's not great, it's fine. And a 2/2 for 2 that flickers a creature, it's pretty niche, but obviously there is some enchantment removal in this set that we'll see, and it'll be nice to get your creatures out from underneath it. But it doesn't have flash, so it's not like it's saving your creature from instant speed removal or even sorcery speed removal for that matter. So all told, this card is fine. Like, it's a C+. It's absolutely going in every white deck you ever play. But it's not a super high pick. It's gonna feel bad to see this as your rare. It should be much more like 4th, 5th, 6th pick, I think. But you'll be happy to have it. So it's a strong C+, but it's no higher than a C+. Up next is the Circle of Loyalty. The Circle of Loyalty is 4 white for a legendary artifact at Mythic. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each knight creature you control, or sorry, knight you control, but I think they're all creatures. Creatures you control get +1/+1. Whenever you cast a legendary spell, create a 2/2 white knight creature token with Vigilance. Pay 3 and a white and tap it. Create a 2/2 white knight creature token with Vigilance. With no knights and no legendary spells, This card's probably still just totally playable. An Anthem and a mana sink that makes 2/2s, that's great. Now, if this is cheaper, because you do have some knights on the table, which should not be very hard in white, and especially not in white-black or white-red, then this thing's going to be amazing. I don't quite think this will be like ethereal absolution levels of insane, and thankfully this is a mythic instead of a rare, but this is still just a slam dunk first pick, and then you'll build around it with the bonus of it still being totally solid, even if you fail to build around it. Solid A here, great card, easy first pick. Up next is Deafening Silence. Deafening Silence is a single white mana for enchantment at uncommon. Each player can't cast more than one non-creature spell each turn. Nope. Up next, I'll talk briefly about it. It's awful. You never want to play it. It's for constructed sideboards only. In most games of Limited, on most turns in games of Limited, each player's only casting one non-creature spell each turn. It's pretty darn rare for anybody to cast a second one, and making your opponent unable to that rare time typically isn't going to make any real difference. And hurting yourself a little bit so that you don't get that rare opportunity either is just awful. This card's not worth a card. It doesn't do enough. It is an F-. You should never play it. Up next is Fairy Guidemother. Fairy Guidemother is a single white mana for a creature fairy at common. She's a 1/1. And she flies, but she also has an adventure, Gift of the Fae. Gift of the Fae is 1 and a white for a sorcery adventure. Target creature gets +2/+1 and gains flying until end of turn. I'm not a huge fan of this either, but again, being an adventure, I think it's still just good. +2/+1 and flying at sorcery speed will end a game here or there, but not being able to use it as a combat trick is pretty crummy. Getting a 1/1 flyer after means you don't feel quite as bad using that adventure, even if it's not ending the game, even if it is just getting an extra bit of damage through. But this is still pretty filler for me. Since it is an adventure card, I think I might just have to go like C+ on most adventure cards, just because of that whole 2 cards on 1 card thing. But I think this is a weaker of the C+s, so a weak C+ for Fairy Guidemother. Up next is Flutterfox. Flutterfox is 1 and a white for a creature fox at common. It's a 2/2. As long as you control an artifact or enchantment, Flutterfox has flying. It has wings on its feet for some reason. I don't think that fox would actually be able to fly. Anyways, it's a bear with a little bit of an upside if you happen to have an artifact or enchantment, which if you're blue-white, you've got a chance of actually having. If you're not blue-white, well, you still have an okay chance of having something. This is fine. It's just a totally solid C+. If you are in blue-white artifacts, I think it's a strong C+, but still just a C+. Up next is Fortifying Provisions. Fortifying Provisions is 2 and a white for an enchantment at common. Creatures you control get +0/+1. When Fortifying Provisions enters the battlefield, create a food token. I just don't have any interest in this. 3 mana to give +1 or +0/+1, just pumping up my team's butts. And I get a food. I'm not really interested in this at all. I can see an argument for this coming in out of the side if you find out that your opponent is very aggressive, but I don't know that +0/+1 really is guaranteed to stop you. I think there must be better sideboard plans, or you just hope your luck is better. Getting the food bonus doesn't really do much for me. If you are in blue-white artifacts, which I keep saying is artifacts, but I mean artifact/enchantment deck, maybe this is good because it is 2 artifacts and enchantments for the price of 1. So I'll keep an eye on it for there, but as it is, I'm going to start at an F on this. I just don't think it's any good. I'll look for those sideboard opportunities, but I just don't think it's a good sideboard choice. And I'll look for the blue-white artifact enchantment potential synergy, but again, I think there's just got to be better choices than this. So I'm going to start at an F on this. I will keep an eye on it, but to start, F for Fortifying Provisions. Up next is Giant Killer. Giant Killer is a single white mana for a creature human peasant at rare. It's a 1/2. You can pay 1 and a white and tap him to tap target creature, but he can go on an adventure first. Chop Down is 2 and a white for an instant adventure. Destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. this card is super, super, super good and very first pickable. Chop Down is a sideboard card in most formats that I wouldn't generally want to main deck, and I wouldn't really main deck here. But being able to main deck it, because at the worst case, it's a fantastic tapper creature, is awesome. This card is great basically any way you use it, anywhere you draw it. 2 mana is more than 1 mana to tap a creature, sure, but that's still cheapish for an unconditional tapper. We're not only tapping flyers, we're not only tapping creatures with power 3 or greater, we're tapping whatever we want. I love this card. I think it's a solid B+. I'm first picking it almost always. It's not quite a bomb, it is just a 1/2 tapper, but a solid B+. Glass Casket is up next. Glass Casket is 1 and a white for an artifact at uncommon. When Glass Casket enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls with converted mana cost 3 or less until Glass Casket leaves the battlefield. Sold. It's Baffling End without the potential downside of your opponent getting a 3/3, which basically never happened anyways. And I guess technically Baffling End permanently exiled the creature and this one doesn't, but still, it's basically the same card. There will be targets for this, so while it is technically conditional removal, it's not really that conditional, and while it likely won't be a bomb that you're removing something. Plus potential artifact synergy if you're in the right deck. I think this is first pickish. There is better removal and better bombs out there that should go ahead of this, but as is, I think it's just a solid B for Glass Casket. Up next is Happily Ever After. It couldn't be a Fables set if it didn't have Happily Ever After. 2 and a white for an enchantment at rare. When Happily Ever After enters the battlefield, each player gains 5 life and draws a card. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 5 colors among permanents you control, there are 6 or more card types among permanents you control and or cards in your graveyard, and your life total is greater than or equal to your starting life total, you win the game. It's an alternate win condition. I love alternate win conditions, but this is not one that you will ever try for in limited, or at least that you should not. Having 5 colors among permanents you control is going to be very hard in this set. This set, I think, arguably tries to push you a little bit towards monocolored, or at least heavily one-colored, let alone actually having 5 colors. Having 6 or more card types among permanents that you control or in your graveyard, that's a lot of card types. You'll have a land, you'll have an enchantment, you'll hopefully have a creature, and then what are we looking at? We're looking at instant sorcery artifacts, and if you're incredibly lucky, a planeswalker, I suppose. Very hard to get that. And then your life total being greater than or equal to your starting life total, maybe, but that could be pretty rough as well. You're just never winning off of this card. So really this card is 2 and a white sorcery speed. Both players gain 5 life and draw a card, and I'm not interested in that kind of symmetrical effect. Not one that I'm playing anyways. My opponent can play it. They can give me 5 life and a card all they want, but I'm not. This is an F. You should not play it. Up next is Harmonious Archon. Harmonious Archon is 4 white for a creature Archon at Mythic. It's a 4/5 flyer. But that's not all. Non-Archon creatures have base power and toughness 3/3. When Harmonious Archon enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 white human creature tokens, which will, of course, instantly become 3/3s. This is a 10/11 for 6. Thank goodness this is Mythic. This card is just nutty, absolutely nutty. There are some weirdness where you might actually downgrade too many of your creatures into 3/3s, or you might upgrade too many of your opponent's creatures into 3/3s, but in general, that 4/5 is going to hold things down, even if you do upgrade a bunch of your opponent's creatures. This is a snap first pick. It's likely to be just a game-ending bomb. There's really no other grade for this than A+, unless somehow 6-drops aren't easily castable, which I do not foresee being the case. A+ for Harmonious Archon. This card is nuts. Up next is Hushbringer. Hushbringer is 1 and a white for a creature fairy at rare. It's a 1/2 with weird art. Flying lifelink. Creatures entering the battlefield or dying don't cause abilities to trigger. The card's okay. A 1/2 lifelinking flyer is okay, like the sea level, maybe C+, but probably not. The rules text could help or hurt you. It depends, of course, on how many of these ETB or dying effects that you have. And if a bunch of them will be muted, then you maybe don't include this. But if you don't have many of these effects, if you're a pretty straightforward deck, well, then this is probably fine to include. And of course, sometimes you'll see that your opponent actually has a lot of these, maybe even is straight up taking advantage of them, and then you might side this in pretty handily. So this is like a C. I think you can take it or leave it in a lot of decks, and some decks you should actively not play it. A C for Hushbringer. Obviously much more designed for constructed sideboards. Up next is Knight of the Keep. Knight of the Keep is 2 and a white for a creature human knight at common. It's a 3/2 with some flavor text. It's cuttable. It's a 3/2 for 3, which is filler. It's a C at that. It's a knight, which means if you do have knight abilities, it gets a little bit of a bonus, but I don't think this goes above a C at all. So just a C. If you are in the knights deck, I don't know, let's give it a C plus minus, like a very weak C plus. But yeah, a C for Knight of the Keep. Up next is Linden, the Steadfast Queen. Linden is white, white, white for a legendary creature human noble at rare. She's a 3/3 with vigilance. Whenever a white creature you control attacks, you gain 1 life. It's a hard to cast 3/3 for 3, which is not super exciting. Vigilance doesn't really make her that much more exciting, and the life gain is cute, but not really doing much for me. She's still fine, and if you are heavily white, you'll always be happy to have her, but I don't think you're picking her very highly or early in the draft. I think she's kind of like a B-. C+ feels too low, but if you are sort of predominantly another color, if you have like 7 planes, you maybe don't play her because she's not going to be a 3-drop. She's going to be like a 6-drop. So B- for Linden. She's fine. Up next is Lonesome Unicorn. Lonesome Unicorn is 4 and a white for a creature unicorn at common. It's a 3/3 vigilance. It has an adventure, though. Rider in Need. Rider in Need is 2 and a white for a sorcery adventure. You create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. The creature alone is awful. A 3/3 vigilance does not justify 5 mana. Absolutely not. I would never play that card. But the 2/2 vigilance for 3 is begrudgingly playable if you really needed a creature. And then the overcosted unicorn at that point is just a bonus. If you never cast it, oh well, you got a 2/2 vigilance for 3, which still isn't that good. But if you do cast it, you got yourself 2 creatures. 2 begrudgingly playable creatures combined on 1 card, I think makes 1 filler creature. I think it's still just a C. I guess we did find an adventure card that I'm not going to give a C+ to. But I'd still just prefer to have better choices where I can. So a C for Lonesome Unicorn. Mysterious Pathlighter is up next. Mysterious Pathlighter is 2 and a white for a creature fairy at uncommon. It's a 2/2 flyer. Each creature you control that has an adventure enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So having an adventure just means that there is an adventure printed on the card. The creature doesn't have to have gone on that adventure, but if they do have an adventure on it, then they will enter with an additional +1/+1. This card's fine. It's totally solid. It's all, gravy. Will play a 2 and a white 2/2 flyer normally. That's like a C right there. That's a card that you'll pretty happily include. You'll play something better if you can. But if you are having a bunch of adventures, the green-white deck specifically is very adventure heavy, then this might just upgrade all the creatures that come down. And being a 3-drop means that it can come down early enough that your adventuring creatures haven't been played yet. So I think this card's very good. I think it's like a B- actually. If you have no adventures at all, I think you can still just play it like a C. But yeah, if you do have a bunch of adventures, this is like a B-. It's a very good card. B- for Mysterious Pathlighter. Up next is Outflank. Outflank is a single white mana for an instant at common. Outflank deals damage to target attacking or blocking creature equal to the number of creatures you control. I think this reads a lot better than it necessarily is. I'm not 100% sold on this. If I have a whole bunch of creatures and this does a whole bunch of damage, my opponent's probably not attacking me, which means the attacking part's not happen. I hopefully am attacking my opponent, and if I potentially get to kill one of their blocking creatures, cool, but I'm not sold on this. This is, again, one of these removal spells that is super inconsistent game to game to game. Sometimes this does 0 damage, which would be bad. You're probably dead anyways. Sometimes it deals, I don't know, 20 damage. I don't like stuff like that. I like consistent spells. So I'm going to keep an eye on this, but I do think that it's actually way worse than a lot of people are going to expect. I'll put this at maybe like a C+ if you are definitely in the go wide deck or one of the go wide decks. If you're not, you really probably just shouldn't play this, and I definitely don't want to play multiples of these. So C+ if you're certain that it's going to do a lot of damage often, and even then I think the scenarios where it does a lot of damage aren't going to pop up that much. Up next is Prized Griffin. Prized Griffin is 4 and a white for a 3/4 flyer, and that's it. It's Shining Aerosaur from Ixalan, or Rivals of Ixalan, whichever one it was, but it doesn't have a relevant creature type. It's non-human, but white doesn't really care about non-humans. So this is filler. If you have a spot for a 5-drop, if you need a creature, if you need some way of getting through some damage, maybe you just didn't quite get an actual bomb or an actual way to end the game, this can fill in. It's not ideal, but it can fill in. It's just a C. You cut it, you play it. It's fine. A C for Prized Griffin. Rally for the Throne is up next. Rally for the Throne is 2 and a white for an instant at uncommon. Create 2 1/1 white human creature tokens. It has Adamant. If at least 3 white mana was spent to cast this spell, you gain 1 life for each creature you control. I'm not a fan of this. 3 mana for Raise the Alarm is not something I really want to play. If I'm playing heavily in white and I get to Adamant this, then I get a few life. Yay. This doesn't make it that much better. If you're go wide and you absolutely need ways of going wide, this is playable, and it's okay filler if you really need something, if you desperately need a 23rd card, but I'm not picking this up very highly at all. It's a run-of-the-mill C. I think it actually pushes lower as a C-, but yeah, it's not great, even if you Adamant it out. Realm Cloaked Giant is up next. Realm Cloaked Giant is 5 white for a creature giant at Mythic. It's a 7/7 vigilance. It has an adventure called Cast Off. Cast Off is 3 white for a sorcery adventure. Destroy all non-giant creatures. There are some giants in the set. It's a story, it's a fairy tale set after all, but they're pretty rare, uncommon. They're mostly in red and green. Odds are this generally is going to kill every other creature on the battlefield. Now, I typically don't super like board wipes in limited unless they're asymmetrical, like Time Wipe or the one from Khans of Tarkir that I can never remember, something about dust, or if they're really cheap or something like that. 3 white kill probably everything is fine. But the other thing that I typically hate about them in limited is I have to not play creatures, and not playing creatures is very rarely the right choice in limited. But this has the huge bonus of you can play into your own board wipe. You still probably don't want to too heavily, but if you do, you know that a turn or two later, you're going to have this 7/7 vigilance coming down, and it's going to stomp over a whole bunch of things. So I think this card's very good. I think it's definitely a first pick. I'm going to keep it a little bit shy of the bomb territory. 7 mana is a lot. Getting a Wrath to be very, very, very good is a little bit tricky and limited, and it's even worse in Game 2 and Game 3 if your opponent's already seen it. So A-, very good, first pickable, but I'm going to keep it away from the A or A+ range. Up next is Righteousness. Righteousness is a single white mana for an instant at uncommon. Target blocking creature gets +7/+7 until end of turn. It's a reprint all the way from Alpha, and it used to be a rare too. Yikes, this card's awful and just not what I want to be doing at all. Yes, it will save a creature in combat, pretty much guaranteed. Yes, it'll kill whatever it's blocking, pretty much guaranteed. But putting a card in your deck that only ever does something on blocks, absolutely not worth a card. Zero interest in ever putting this card in my deck. I'm pretty sure I'd play another basic land over this, but yeah, be proactive, don't play this. F for Righteousness. Up next is Shepherd of the Flock. Shepherd of the Flock is 1 and a white for a creature human peasant at uncommon. It's a 3/1 with flavor text. It has an adventure though called Usher to Safety. Usher to Safety is a single white mana for an instant adventure. Return target permanent you control to its owner's hand. This card's fine enough. A 3-1 for 2 is my favorite stats. I talk about that every set review. And you should just be playing this on turn 2 every single time you have it. You don't want to be holding on to that adventure to get the value out of it, because a 3-1 is way less impactful if it doesn't come down on turn 2. But if you top deck this, then having that option of having that sort of insurance and then a bonus 3-1 that may still just be worthless is fine. I like this card. It's not a high pick though. It's definitely not above a C+, and it's probably not even a C+. That's probably just my love of 3-1s for 2 talking. Shining Armor is up next. Shining Armor is 1 and a white for an artifact equipment at common. It's got flash. When Shining Armor enters the battlefield, attach it to target knight you control. Equipped creature gets +0/+2 and has vigilance. Equip cost of 3. The effect equip cost aren't good. I'd never want to play this. Having flash costing only 2 mana and auto equipping, that part's fine. It's a nice little trick that sticks around even after the tricky part is done. Obviously, it only works if you have a knight, so if you're really low on knights, you just don't play this. If you're lacking knights, this is like a D- for me. I really don't want to play it. 3 is just a massive equip cost, and if the ability isn't amazing, then I don't want to play it. With knights though, it's maybe like 22nd cardish, maybe even 21st. I think I can go a C+ on this. Basically, you should be treating this as a combat trick, because if you're just playing this as equipment, because you don't have many knights, well, it's way less good. Silver Flame Ritual is up next. Silver Flame Ritual is 3 and a white for a sorcery at common. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Adamant, if at least 3 white mana was spent to cast this spell, creatures you control gain vigilance until end of turn. This is very deck dependent, obviously. If you are absolutely definitely going to go wide, then this goes up in value. If you're not sure about that, this is much worse. If you're not getting at least 2 counters out of this, I think it's stone unplayable, and I'd probably want upwards of like 4 before I start to really feel happy about it. Not being instant speed is a really big hit against it. The Adamant bonus is cute, but not really that impactful in most scenarios, so it doesn't really boost the grade for me at all. All in all, I think it's a C if you're in the right deck, and if you're not, then that's much more in the D range, where I would really strongly prefer to not play it. Silver Flame Squire is up next. Silver Flame Squire is 1 and a white for a creature human soldier at common. It's a 2/1 with flavor text. It has an adventure on alert. On alert is 2 and a white for an instant adventure. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Untap it. It's an okay combat trick, and then you get a piker a little bit later, which is even less impactful than a turn 2/1. Pikers just aren't that impactful. A 2/1 for 2 is pretty mediocre. If you are heavy in aggro, it's okay, but even then you still can usually get better stuff, or would prefer better stuff. And if you are going to use the combat trick first, getting a 2/1 on turn 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 is way less good as well. I think this is actually another C adventure, so I guess not all of them are instant C+. It's still fine. If you need a creature, if you have an open spot, sure, go ahead. But I don't think it's going to hit that C+ range. So just a C for Silver Flame Squire. Up next is Sir Alan the Lion's Claw. Sir Alan the Lion's Claw is 3 white for a legendary creature human knight at uncommon. There's one of these for each color. Alan is a 4/4 with first strike, and whenever Sir Alan the Lion's Claw attacks, other creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. This seems great. A 4/4 first strike for 5 is totally solid, and antheming your attackers is great in any deck that plans on attacking, which will be most white decks. Very strong card, could be first pickable in some packs. It's just great. It's not quite a bomb, but I'm pretty happy with this as a solid B+. B+ for Sir Alan. Trapped in a Tower is up next. Trapped in the Tower is 1 and a white for an enchantment aura at common. Enchant creature without flying. Enchanted creature can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. It's a rest, but it's a rest that can't hit flyers. That's worse. That's definitely worse, because flyers are often a prime target because you can't deal with them. As well, keep in mind there is a little bit of trickery here, where if your opponent, or you for that matter, if you have been trapped in the tower, give the creature that this is on flying, this falls off. Auras are always checking to make sure that they're valid, so the second they're not valid, they do go away, so keep that in mind. But yeah, this is still removal against everything that's not flying that is scary, and that's still very, very good. I think this is like a solid B, but because flyers are often the scariest things, I'm not going to go any higher than that. Maybe I can go up to a B+. Let's go up to a B+. Let's be generous. B+ for Trapped in a Tower. It's still going to be the first pick in a lot of packs, but I'd prefer something that can hit the scariest of creatures, which are big, scary flyers. Up next is True Love's Kiss. True Love's Kiss is 2 white for an instant at common. Exile target artifact or enchantment. Draw a card. Be aware, you can't cycle this. You can't just pay 2 white and draw a card. You have to have a target for this. And you're just not always going to have a target. Yes, there's a number of artifacts in this set. Yes, there's enchantments in this set. Yes, there's a deck built around that fact. But I just don't think that you're always going to have a good enough target for this, especially with it costing 4 mana, for me to ever auto-include this card. I'm going to start absolutely sideboarding this card only, but out of the sideboard, it's going to be very good. So it is a D+. It's a very good sideboard card, but it is a sideboard card. Venerable Knight is up next. Venerable Knight is 1 single white mana for a creature human knight at uncommon. It's a 2/1 for 1, and when Venerable Knight dies, put a +1/+1 counter on target knight you control. So I hate 1/1s for 1. I always hate 1/1s for 1, but 2/1s for 1? I love 2/1s for 1. That is a solid aggro creature. A 2/1 for 1 on turn 1 is a great feeling. And if you're rather knightly, getting a bonus when it finally bites it is great as well, because trust me, 2/1s bite it. Obviously, this is way less good if you top deck it in the late game. But if your plan is to go fast, go wide, this will help you out. Still, ultimately, it's just like a strongish C+. In fact, I don't even think it's a strong C+. I think it's just a C+. But it's my kind of C+. C+ for Venerable Knight. Our second last card for white is Worthy Knight. Worthy Knight is 1 and a white for a creature human knight at rare. It's a 2/2. Whenever you cast a night spell, create a 1/1 white human creature token. Obviously, it's a build around with very few knights. It's like a C because it's a bear still. But if you're pretty knightly, then it's, going to be more in the B- range. It's still just a 2/2, and it still is just making 1/1s, so it's not insane. Remember, Hero of Precinct 1 wasn't insane in limited, it was just good. But in a properly built go-wide knight deck, this will put in some work. So it's like a B- in some decks, and in other decks it's more of a C. So C, B- for Worthy Knight. Our final card for white is a blast from the past, Youthful Knight. Youthful Knight is 1 and a white for a creature human knight at common. It's a 2/1 with first strike. I remember this card from Stronghold a long time ago. It actually looks like it was in Modern Masters 2017 last, so not too long ago, but it used to have great Rebecca Gay art. But yeah, this is a totally fine card. It's a 2/1 for 2, which is generally not very good. Very cuttable. It's a piker, but first strike utterly changes this. This makes this way more like a 2/2 or even a little bit better. I'm pretty happy with this card. And of course, if you are in Knights, it gets even better. I think this is just a solid C+. And if you're in Knights, it's a solid C+ as well. It doesn't get that much better. C+ for Youthful Knight. I think this card's totally playable. So that's going to wrap it up for all of the white cards today. White looks interesting. I'm happy to see an alternate win condition, even though it's actually never going to happen in limited. But there's some good removal with Glass Casket and Trapped in a Tower. There's some very interesting cards with Circle of Loyalty and Harmonious Archon. It's just a crazy bomb. Let me know what you think of all the cards in white, what ones you're excited for, what ones you agree with, disagree with. Talk with me, talk with each other in the comments down below. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me over on Twitter, Twitch, and Facebook. You can find me at patreon.com/ShamanAleek, where you can become a backer and actually help the channel out directly. There's a giant group of people over there who are absolutely the lifeblood of the channel, so thank you to them. You can help the channel out by going to inkedgaming.com/whatever. Actually, there's no slash. You could just use the promo code MANALEEK10, all one word, 10 is the number, to get 10% off your order and help the channel out that way. And of course, the easiest, the cheapest, the quickest way to help out the channel is to click like, share, and subscribe. If you do have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all tomorrow for the blue set review.